Training 2.0. This is our second go around. Last year we ran a similar series in person. We were in a very different moment when we started this initiative together. When I say we, I'm talking about the consortium of St. Stephen's House, also known as the Neighborhood Group Community Services, OCASI, and MASS. In our first go around, we also had on as a partner Access Alliance, which is a community health center in Toronto, as well as Toronto Social Planning Council, who were our evaluators. This year, there are the three organizations, and we are doing evaluation, but we're working with a different consulting group around evaluation. It's great to have our former partner from our first go around, Axel Chancellor from Access Alliance on this call. We will be providing a series of virtual webinars every 2 weeks or so. We will have to make a change to our October 28th anti-racism scheduled webinar because it conflicts with the OCASI conference and a panel discussion on a similar theme. So we will have to move that webinar back by a week or so, but we are excited to bring to you a series of webinars every couple of weeks. This is a great opportunity, as you will see from our inaugural discussion this afternoon, to gain new knowledge, to provide insights into from your own experience, to ask questions, to network with other board members in the for public benefit or not-for-profit sector, regardless of which language you're using. Some folks also call us the charitable sector. It is a time to share information and to talk about some strategies that you've tried and maybe failed, and to hear feedback in terms of some strategies that have been working well in terms of how it is that we are leading our organizations. The webinar sessions will run from this month, October, through the end of January. We will be recording, as I said, all of our sessions, and the recordings will be made available on our website, and we will post the website link in our chat at some point if it isn't already there. Let me just give you very quickly, I'll spend the next couple of minutes just giving you an overview of what we envision for the next 3 months. As I said, we will have a series of webinars. There we will also be selecting 10 organizations to receive 9 hours of coaching from experienced coaches from St. Stephen's Community House. To qualify for the coaching, and this is important for those of you on the call, especially our board members, to qualify for the coaching, interested organizations will need to attend the webinar series, participate in our learning exchange sessions. And we're really excited about the learning exchange sessions because the learning exchange sessions, think about it as our tutorials in university. It is a place to do deeper dives into some of the conversations that you've had on the webinars. It is a place to ask questions, to work with expert resource people, and to work with smaller groups in terms of some of the issues that may surface from the webinars. The coaching will be provided between January and March. So at the end of the webinars and the learning sessions, then the coachings will start. As I said, 10 organizations. You will need to attend the webinars. You will need to attend the learning lessons, and you will need to apply as an organization for the 9 hours of coaching. It's invaluable. The feedback from the last time around, I can't tell you how beneficial the organizations who participated found it. So we highly recommend that you put in an application for one of the 10 spots. We know that organizations, and especially small organizations, we encourage to participate in these webinars. The webinars will give you new information. It will also cover some of the nuts and bolts of governance that we have to pay attention to. There's really new thinking, and you will hear some of this from this afternoon's panel in terms of governance and our approaches to governance. I think increasingly, especially in this political moment in which we are living through this pandemic, or the two pandemics, as some folks are calling it, the health pandemic of COVID, but also the surfacing of racism, and particularly anti-Black racism and other racisms. We saw a spike and an ongoing increase in anti-Asian racisms across the country as COVID continues to be linked to China and the Chinese population. There have been many examples that organizations like the Chinese Canadian National Council Social Justice Network have been documenting, and they are preparing to run pro anti-racism work across the country. We know that anti-Black racism, and I, as I wrote in my blog this month, I don't believe we've seen such a heightened awareness around anti-Black racism and such a resistance movement since the late 1960s, early 1970s, at the height of the African liberation movement. And this is not only here in North America, this is across the globe. We are seeing everyone from all parts of the world, from every part of our societies, really responding to the call for an end to anti-Black racism and a call for Black liberation. Our governments have responded in various ways at all levels. Some leaving a lot to be desired, but it is on the public agenda. I think that it is important as nonprofit organizations that we too have a role to play. We have a role to play in ensuring that our workplaces are reflective of the communities where we are located. I think as boards of nonprofit organizations, you have a responsibility to ensure that your organization is proactively being anti-racist, that when you look at your staffing, you're seeing the city where you are located reflected in that. When you look at your governance structures, you're seeing the faces of the people, and not only in terms of in tokenistic ways so that you have one of each, but that the life experiences and the expertise that folks from racialized backgrounds and Black and Indigenous backgrounds bring to the table is appreciated and is represented through your organization, in your approach to how it is that you're doing your work, in your approach to how it is that you're doing programming, in your approach to how it is that you are presenting your work to the world. So looking forward to our conversation this afternoon. Having said all of that, what I will do is introduce our panels one at a time. So I'll introduce our first panelist. They will present. I will leave some time for questions. As I said, please keep yourself muted. Ask your questions in the chat. I will read your questions, and then we will then move on to the second panelist and then the third panelist. So with all of that, take a deep breath, sit back, and be prepared to be informed and to have great fun as we start our conversation with each other during our inaugural conversation on governance. I'm calling it governance in the middle of a syndemic. I love how academics just coin these terms. Every time I see it show up in my thing, what the hell is a syndemic? Anyways, it means more than one pandemic at the same time. So there you go. We're calling it the two pandemics at OCASI. So our first presenter is Bill Sinclair. Bill is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Neighborhood Group Community Services, a multi-service organization located in the city of Toronto. Bill has worked in the nonprofit sector for more than 33 years and was previously the Executive Director of St. Stephen's House, one of the founding partners of the Neighborhood Group. Bill, welcome.
Thank you. How's my volume? Good, okay.
Very good.
Great. Hi, everyone. I am going to use a PowerPoint. I hope that's not off-putting for some people, but it helps to keep me on track. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so welcome. And our topics today are the current governance landscape. So throughout the webinar series that are going to happen in the next 3 or 4 months, there'll be many topics, importance for boards. But so we would set off by doing some context setting. So what is the context for our boards right now, the current governance landscape, and really the crises that we're all facing? Okay, I should have planned my slides so that to account for the little picture box on the side. This is the description of the webinar from the flyer and the website. So we're going to frame the governance issue in the current structural challenges that we're facing, including COVID, anti-Black racism, gender, the economy, and just a number of ways in which our organizations are under stress, and boards in particular are under stress. Who am I? I was introduced by Debbie. The Neighborhood Group is a large nonprofit charity in Toronto, and we're integration of 3 historic organizations that you may have heard of, like Central Neighborhood House, St. Stephen's Community House, and Neighborhood Link. And we provide a wide variety of services. And our main focus is direct services to the community, so childcare, youth centers, settlement services, employment, supportive housing, home care for seniors, and more. So very much a service organization.
Bill, sorry, could you put it on slideshow so we can see the full slide?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's great.
So at the moment, nonprofits are facing incredible challenges, and many nonprofits have had to close their doors, even if temporarily, but some of them may never reopen. Some may have to declare bankruptcy. This is really a dark day for the nonprofit sector and the charitable sector. There are 3 sets of challenges that I wanted to talk about. One was, previous challenges that we were already facing. The second is COVID challenges. And the third is what I'm calling challenges to our missions, challenge for us to think about our mission and what we should be doing as nonprofits. So the previous challenges. So one of the big ones, and there'll be a little bit of discussion around this later on when we talk about reimagining governance, which is the old legal and policy frameworks under which we act. So the charity law, corporate law, old ways of meeting and structuring organizations, old definitions of public good, old definitions of advocacy, old definitions of generating revenue and how revenue is allowed to be generated. And I will say that there's a lot of the traditional corporate structure of charities haven't changed in 300 years and do favor a patriarchal, white supremacy, colonialist kind of framework of how organizations have been set up for hundreds of years. And so, I do think that we need to be looking at, is this the best way to meet social justice aims of a community and to move social justice forward in a community? The second previous challenge that we've been wrestling with is community needs exceeding resources. Perennial problem everyone talks about, the challenges with fundraising, the challenges of having to compete for government grants, the unequal power dynamics that we face with government in working in partnership with government, but not always feeling that we're working in partnership with government to meet community needs. And this often leads to volunteer burnout and frustration, and organizations feeling excluded and challenged and not able to meet their needs in their community because they're not able to get the resources. So these are existing challenges even before COVID struck. And then there are COVID challenges. And so I'm putting a whole group of them under what I'm calling dislocation. So locations closing, opening, closing again, people working from home, insufficient and unreliable IT, relationships between people, whether they're volunteers or board members or staff and clients and service users and participants, being strained, people being isolated, the massive loss of older volunteers that has struck the sector. I always tell a story that in one of our neighborhoods, the Out of the Colds that was run at our local church, the food bank that was run down the street, all the sports clubs, just about everything shut down immediately as, and all the volunteer-driven services were struck simultaneously, just when the community needed them the most. And so we lost shelter beds, we lost food banks, we lost supports and services overnight. So part of that is related to the fact of volunteers being unable to work. And then the pivoting of services, and many services moving to online platforms and different ways of working, takeout meals as opposed to community meals, lots of things like that. And then loss of fees. So any fee-based charity, any charity that relied on fees, including daycares, including lots of recreation and sports and culture organizations, overnight lost all their fees. And so that was a great shock and dislocation for those organizations. So lots of dislocation challenges. The second is governance practices, specifically from a board. The strangeness of using new platforms for board meetings, switching to conference calls or online. I've heard of some boards that just didn't meet for 3 months because they couldn't meet and they were struggling to connect and struggling to work as a team during the crisis. Many others tried conference calls and Zoom and different platforms, but it was strange and it's not the way they work. And it was very challenging for them to do what they wanted to do. In many cases, we had a shift of the board agenda from regular reports and planning to crisis mode. And I will confess, in my own organization, the first 3 board meetings seemed to be nothing but emergency crisis reports of what was going on. Staff able to work, staff not able to work, programs that were closed, programs that were open. Really, very much a crisis cabinet kind of mode for a lot of boards. And then the old tools, strategic plans, financial reports, cash flows, even committee terms of reference, were not helpful in this environment. We're not meeting the needs. Strategic plans were largely stalled or out the window. Financial reports made no sense. When you lose all your fees overnight, none of the cash flows were accurate or meaningful. So there was just a lot of the things that the board needs or uses to give structure to their work and their planning, became not effective tools. And so this is enormous stress for boards who were faced with what appears to be enormous financial crises, in many cases bigger than their reserve funds, and lacking the tools in which to respond effectively. So, big stress for our community members, big stress for our staff, and big stress for our board members at the same time. And then the third areas of challenge are what I'm calling challenges to our mission. And so the first one is high community needs. So we are seeing the highest rates of unemployment in over a decade, probably over several decades. We are seeing higher rates of homelessness and evictions happening in our community, higher than most of us in our work life remember. Hunger has really shocked people, even with CERB and other income supports. The massive immediate unemployment and the extra costs related to COVID that people were living with resulted in just a lack of food and an enormous hunger. Most food banks seem to have doubled their output of what was requested. I know we do Meals on Wheels as well. The amount of Meals on Wheels has doubled. The request for food and food insecurity has doubled. And then the fourth one, and harder to measure, is the mental health crisis. Many of our programs experience the anxiety and fears, but also the isolation and the mental health crisis of many populations that could not get face-to-face services, that lost their support network, that lost their job, lost their volunteer work. More family experienced bereavement and shocking bereavement of family members dying, of bereavement support in the community. So a major mental health crisis. And so I think that at the moment, this is a challenge to our mission, that whatever your original mission statement says, I think that we need to question whether these high community needs, unemployment, homelessness, hunger, and mental health, overrides your current mission. And this is what the community needs from you today. And that's a tough thing for a board to talk about, and for an agency to talk about, is how do they get engaged with these crises in their community, regardless of what they thought their mission was the day before. And then the second challenge to our mission is demands for racial justice. So there are increased organizational and community demands to address anti-Black racism and truth and reconciliation in our governance, in our staffing, in our services, and in our advocacy. And this is welcome. It's not that this wasn't there before, but as Debbie mentioned, there has been an incredible uprising of demand for this to be addressed and for this to be part of the recovery and part of the solution, and really organizations needing to be being on the right side of this issue, fighting anti-Black racism, again, as an employer, but also as an advocate and as a service provider. And actually, things that we've been talking about for years, such as measuring racial data so that you can demonstrate whether or not you are allocating resources to serve people who are most impacted by poverty and injustice. And so who is being served by your programs? So many challenges to how our services are delivered, our advocacy is done, and the makeup of our staff and board. So one organization's experience, one board's experience. So at the neighborhood group, we have been, I think we've largely adjusted to new platforms for meetings. We had our first virtual AGM. It was quite an adjustment for our volunteers, for our board, to our members to be in that kind of environment. I think we've now moved somewhat from crisis mode to really strategic planning and back to our strategic plan, but coming up with more short-term and urgent plans that fit the current context and situation of what we're seeing. So in fact, we're having a board retreat in 2 weeks. We're going to identify the immediate 1-year goals of our strategic plan as they relate to the new crisis. One of the things I'm proud of, that our organization, we're opening up 100 units of new supportive housing this winter. It's long been our strategic goal, but never has it been needed more, that we need to be providing new affordable rental housing. We worked with the government. We applied for the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy to replace our lost fee revenue. That was, availing yourself of all the existing opportunities is a key part of what boards and organizations are needing to do now. For us, the lost fee revenue is huge. By the time this is over, it could be as much as $5 million. So how are we going to address this, and how are we going to survive as an organization? We are engaging in an equity audit of our organization, and we've made new commitments, both on anti-Black racism, but also truth and reconciliation as an organization, and looking at it from the multi-prongs of both as an employer, but also as a service provider, and then also as an advocate, that we are speaking up and using our advocacy resources to further these issues. Like many, we're engaging in a major IT upgrade for our organization. It's sort of challenging and tragic that everyone's doing it simultaneously, but I think we've all discovered that we've all had very underinvested IT and very underinvested systems. And we continue to partner with our networks to reduce our isolation as an organization. Just for example, today, of course, I'm here working with OCASI and with the Ontario Nonprofit Network to pull together, to share our information, and hopefully to increase our impact and not go it alone. So that's very important to us. So these are some of the steps that we've taken this year to address those issues, those challenges. So I just want to say we recognize that these are very tough times for nonprofits, for their community staff and boards. Really proud to be co-sponsor of these webinars and this webinar series, that they're going to touch on many important topics for board members. And there will be the learning exchange sessions, including ours next week. So next week, we will hold a learning exchange, a tutorial, where we'll have more of a chance for people, no more PowerPoints, no more content, for people to share their own tips and resources and have more discussion. And I'll be there as a resource person, if I have any information that you want, you can ask me now, but we'll also have more chance to chat next week at the Learning Exchange. And that's my presentation.
Great, thank you, Bill. While we wait for our colleagues to write their questions in the chat box for Bill, any questions you may have, Bill, you identified a number of challenges. Which one do you think is probably will be the most difficult to address, and why?
So I think the challenges are hard because they're tactical. You know, like, how are we going to get food to people who are hungry? How are we going to get computers to people to work? Those are tactical, strategic, operational things that we are solving those. But I think we serving the most disadvantaged. Are we building the capacity of the neighborhoods that we are committed to work with? Are we addressing anti-Black racism? These are harder shifts that to take. How are we going to reallocate our resources to be serving what are the highest needs, and really questioning whether we were serving the highest needs before? And that's always an uncomfortable conversation. So I think there's a lot of uncomfortable conversations as our missions are challenged as organizations. And I think our missions have been challenged more than ever this year. That the status quo was not working, and that, you know, large in Toronto, it's often a neighborhood issue, but large populations of people are being left behind, and that's just become so much more clear through COVID.
Absolutely, and certainly a challenge to the boards. There's a question from Sudeep Minhas. How do we reimagine the patriarchy colonial structures of governance while working to provide services to marginalized communities?
Good question, and that's a great lead into the next speaker, because I'm very happy
Absolutely.
that Ontario Nonprofit Network is leading a project to look at how can we reimagine. Even last night, you know, we're having a board meeting and we had motions, and they legally have to be passed. We have to have a mover and a seconder, and we have to have voting, and it just is so, like, you know, 300 years ago, you know, and it's an environment that is not comfortable for many of the people who ought to be in the room, and it's not set up for people to be in the room, right? It's set up for people, you know, again, a patriarchal, white supremacy, land owning, you know, kind of culture of people who know how to function at meetings and follow Robert's rules and all those things. And how do we change that so that it's, you know, really, we are social justice movements, and how do we act like a movement as opposed to a corporation? And I know there are movements to update the Corporations Act, but I'm not sure that that's going to solve all of this. And there are movements to change the definition of charity at the federal level and to rethink charity. And I think that is also very important, because all of our governing legislations are hundreds of years old.
Yeah, and I think Maya Roy is shaking her head and agreeing in the chat. She's saying it's often a challenge because of the way how governance is set up to retain Black and Indigenous and racialized directors on the board, because of the approaches that are often so colonial in practice. So you're right, this is a really good lead-in, Bill. Thank you so much to our next speaker, Kathy Taylor. Kathy is the Executive Director of the Ontario Nonprofit Network, ONN. Kathy has worked in the nonprofit sector for over 20 years, including as the founding Executive Director of the Volunteer Centre of Wellington. And Kathy is passionate about collaboration and leadership in the sector. Kathy, you're on. Folks, awesome. A reminder, please write your questions in the chat box. Kathy?
Great, thanks, Debbie. How's my volume?
It's good.
Thanks, everyone. So glad to be here. And just to reiterate one of the things that Bill just said, that it is so true. I do feel less isolated and less alone having colleagues like Okazi and the neighborhood group and others join us. So work with us on various issues. So that's just amazing. What I want to talk about in terms of setting the context is that some of the thinking that we've been doing about how we can reimagine governance, think of governance in a different way. And it's exactly for many of the reasons that Bill outlined in terms of what has changed for our sector, how our sector's changed, and how governance and the role of boards has not kept up. I love Bill's comment that governance is so 300 years ago, because it really is exactly that. Our systems are structured and based on legislation and mores and practices that have been around for centuries, not just decades. And so it is timely, if not urgent, for us to start thinking about how we rethink what those structures are. O&M started this work a few years ago, just thinking about the systemic issues facing our sector, which is our job, and what is the governance issue. There's been tons of education and training for boards and capacity building for years and years and years. So the issue, what we came up with the issue isn't about educating board members and doing better education each year. There's lots of great education. The issue is that we haven't actually thought of the role of boards and what it means for governance of an organization in the 21st century. So we called this project Reimagining Governance. And fundamentally, it was because governance isn't what it could be. It's not working optimally. It's even in the best circumstances, the best organizations with the best boards and everything in place, its governance is a struggle. Either recruiting the right people, having the right amount of time, having the right representations, the right perspectives that we want in our work. And we haven't really recognized up until fairly recently that governance itself is actually a system. It's part of the system that we operate in. Governance is a complex system too, and I'm going to show you a map in a minute of our governance system. And the sector has changed over the last 50 years. In fact, we've changed dramatically over the last 50 years, and particularly the last 10, and one could argue the last 8 months. In terms of our role as economic actors, the services we provide, our role as advocates and social change organizations, the role that we play in building the bridge between our communities and governments. And our governance systems have not kept pace with the amount of change that our sector has had to deal with to survive as organizations. So one of the first things that we identified was that governance does not equal the board of directors. The board of directors is a part of our governance system, but it's not the only way we govern our organization. And for many organizations, that alone is an aha moment. Well, I thought, governance is just the board. The governance is far more than a board. And I'll give you an example of that in a moment. Secondly, what we realized we needed to, when we kind of decoupled boards from governance, we realized that the question we needed to ask was fundamentally changed than what we have always been asking. Instead of how do we make our board more effective, the question should be, how do we govern more effectively? And that's a fundamental difference, because how we govern more effectively could include involving people that we serve in our governance structures, thinking about all the different ways we govern our organizations. So it's a really big shift from making the boards more effective to effectively governing. And so that's one of the things I'm going to chat about. And we also know that the trends and forces impacting our sector, emerging leaders that want to get involved, the issue of racial equity in the pandemic, of course, power dynamics of funders and foundations and governments have all affected how our system, our governance system has been created over time. And one of the things that we learned in our research, because our first phase was, of course, doing a bunch of research, was that most of us have set up our boards and our governance systems to be exactly what somebody else has done before us, or somebody else told us, or copied somebody's bylaws, or said, well, this is the way it should be done, without really thinking about how can we control the environment and the governance that we do. So Reimagining Governance is designed to look at what innovative approaches and systems that we can put in place to help organizations have the conversations themselves about how to design their governance to be fit for purpose, to fit your own organization in your own life cycle at your own time. I'm going to share my screen now, and I hope this works. How's that? Can you see that? Great. So just to give you a bit of concreteness about the Reimagining Governance vision, is that our vision is that nonprofit organizations are designing their own governance that is more consistently effective and better able to respond to the complex environments of today and the future. And we did this vision before the pandemic, and I think it's even more relevant today. And if we focus on that, then we recognize that the governance of nonprofit organizations could be more optimal and sustainable if organizations are enabled to effectively focus on their vision and mission, use their resources wisely, allow their leaders to navigate the environments that they find themselves in, and to engage their stakeholders, however they define their stakeholders, in their decision making as part of their governance system. So overall, we're looking to provoke a shift in how organizations, leaders like yourselves, in the nonprofit sector talk about how to fulfill governance, including all the structures and processes and culture and practices that come about of it. And our outcomes is that there's a better understanding of how our governance is created, that there are a growing number of examples of how organizations are doing this differently, that we've actually identified those outdated assumptions and myths that have challenged us, and also that our funders, philanthropists, and capacity builders are also creating new approaches to governance. One of the fun things we've done that has been a real aha moment for me as well has been putting together a map of our governance system. So really, when we started thinking about how do we look at governance differently, if it's not just the board of directors, how do we reimagine governance? We knew that we needed to kind of map out what a governance system could look like. And the aha for me here was that most of us focus on the fixed requirements. You'll see there the binding rules, whether you're a charity or you're a nonprofit, what the legislation says, what's required by law and organization. We see that as the part of our governance structure, the foundation of our governance, when in reality, it's one of many parts of our complex system of governance. And although it's important, the aha moment for us was those fixed requirements are actually really minimal. Most of the stuff that we do as organizations with our boards of directors that we call governance is not required by any law or regulation. It's just how it's developed over time. It's what everybody else does. And we haven't really thought through what would we want to do differently. So it's important to know what those fixed requirements are. And we actually are preparing a tool so that you can see exactly what those fixed requirements are for charities and nonprofits. But it's only one of many design drivers that we call them design drivers, how you design your own governance. There's also the current and future trends and forces that are impacting your organization. The organizational circumstances you find yourself in, that affects how you design your governance, whether you're a startup organization or been around for a long time, whether you have staff or completely volunteer driven. And when you spend some time understanding what those requirements are, what those trends are, what governance functions that are out there that must be fulfilled, then what we believe is that we can actually put together a design playground so that you can design the governance that your organization needs based on what you have to do, what the functions are that are required, what your organizational current state and status is, so that you can create the governance that best suits your organization, with the ultimate goal being better community impact, because nonprofits and charities are here. However you just define community and however you define impact, we're all here to create better community impacts. The other aha moment for me when we did this, put this together, was that the documents that drive our governance, often our bylaws, our constitutions, our mandates, that is not what should drive the governance. That's actually just an underpinning piece that's required once you figure out all of the other pieces. So again, being able to design your own governance, what structures work for you, how your culture works, what culture would you like, the processes that you put in place, whether it's meetings, technology, decision-making, and then the people that are involved, whether it's the board, committees, your participants, clients, your community members, your neighbors, really helps you to think about how governance might look differently. So one of the, and I'll wrap up in a minute. So what we're doing right now is actually, we're just testing that. We've got this, we've done some research. We're in what we call phase 3 of our project. We are creating a transformative process, we're calling it, that organizations will be able to go through on your own, self-facilitated, to have conversations about where you are in your governance, what kind of governance would you like to have, and what some of the options might be for you. We're going to test that with 6 to 10 organizations this fall and winter through learning labs. And then by next spring, hopefully have that process available for free. As always, all of ONN materials are free for organizations to think about and to explore, how that they can design their own governance to fit what they need at this particular moment in time. So that's sort of an outline of our project, but also the idea of reimagining governance. And I think taking the challenge for all of us is to think about how we can think of governance beyond the board of directors, and how governance can enable our organization to be a stronger, better, more resilient organization, rather than a burden for most of us as executive directors and board chairs that worry about, governance as a must-do. Think about governance as an enabler that can make us better organizations. And I think there's lots of opportunities, and it's really exciting to think about it in a different way. So happy to participate today with my colleagues, and happy to take questions as well. And I'll put some links on the chat as well.
Kathy, thank you so much. I love that last point, governance as an enabler rather than a must-do as a way to meet regulatory rules. Why is it more important than ever for us to be reimagining and to be having this conversation about reimagining governance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. I think the pandemic and the double pandemic, as you have so aptly described it, has put incredible pressure on our organizations. And so we don't have the people and the resources that we need to do what we're doing right now. Organizations are failing. I'm hearing the stories every single day about organizations that are closing and going bankrupt. And in some cases, it is because of a governance failure. And in other cases, it's simply they, obviously haven't been designed to withstand something as great as the pandemic that we've been going through. But I think the combination of the pandemic and the urgency around changing business models, rethinking how we structured, focusing on our missions, all of the things that Bill so aptly identified, as well as making sure that we really are the inclusive organizations we say we are. And sometimes in our sector, what we say and what we do are two different things, unfortunately. The focus on anti-racism, particularly anti-Black racism, the focus on the ability to focus on truth and reconciliation as well, has put us in a position where we have to think about how our organizations are making decisions. And fundamentally, governance is about making decisions. And if there was ever a year that we need to get our ducks in order and think about how our organization makes decisions in a way that's meaningful and helpful to our communities, now is the time.
Thank you. There's one question, and it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I think I'm pretty serious as well. Your next step, Sudeep says, is how do we go about convincing boards to give up their power?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. The power dynamics are huge in this work and in reimagining governance. And I think part of it is helping boards understand that that power can look differently, and that their role as a governor of the organization should not to be on a power trip. But to make sure that the mission of the organization continues and is strong. And so it really is about reframing. And for many organizations, they're not going to be ready to have these conversations. They're not going to be ready to think of, anything beyond what they've already done. And we know that. We know that we can't transform 50,000 nonprofits in Ontario to reimagine their governance in the next couple of years. So there's going to need to be some early adopters. that do things differently. The sky doesn't fall down. Boards feel actually more engaged in the organization because they're doing much more meaningful work, and the organization is doing meaningful work when people are engaged in different ways. But certainly we recognize that that there's, for some organizations, this is going to be it'll flip them on their head in terms of thinking about it differently. And we've had some naysayers, in a good way, naysayers involved in the project, because we want to understand where they're coming from. And it is helpful to see, you know, what people's fears and aspirations are, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Our next speaker is Olusola Olumogba. Olusola is the founder and executive director of Direct Your Life. He focuses his efforts on developing and providing tools and guidance to those in conflict with the law, working to rebuild their lives. Olusola, the floor is yours. Folks, I encourage you to write your questions in the box and keep your chat going as well.
Debbie, thanks so much, as well as Bill and Kathy, for what you guys said earlier. But yeah, just to introduce myself to everybody, my name is Olusola Olumogba. I'm the founder, as well as the executive director of Direct Your Life organization, and we focus on providing community supports, as well as mentorship and leadership training for Black youth who are in conflict with the law. So, and you know, just to like kind of tell you guys a bit history about our organization. You know, I had my own, earlier in my life, I had my own experience of being incarcerated. And, you know, I was very fortunate enough to, like, you know, come, you know, get out of prison, you know, go back to school, go back to playing football, because I played football before. And, you know, be able to graduate and live somewhat of a normal life within Canada. And, you know, throughout my success, you know, after finishing football and finishing school, I became a professional football scout, working with the CFL and now the LFL. And, you know, over time, you know, my success, you know, positioned me in a way where I could go back and, like, you know, help people that were in my situation before. So that's how Direct Your Life got started. And, you know, despite, you know, having the will, having, you know, the support to, you know, start and run a not-for-profit organization, there were a lot of things that we were lacking, you know, in respect to, like, you know, governing, you know, the whole organization at the beginning, the idea of it, pushing it forward, as well as just like making the correct decisions at the right time. You know, even like I said, even though I had this, you know, this lived experience, you know, as well as like these other skills, like there were a lot of skills that we were lacking when it came to actually getting an organization off the ground, you know. So, you know, there was a lot of challenges that we did come across, but through just kind of, like I said, you know, being able to connect with the right people, having the right people on our team, as well as just being connected with the right community partners. You know, we were able to, you know, overcome a lot of the challenges that a lot of organizations aren't able to overcome, get funding, you know, to sustain the organization, and, you know, over time, you know, be able to continue doing the work that we love to do in serving our community. And, you know, and when we're getting into the whole, you know, groove of things, you know, COVID hit, and no one was prepared for that, you know, not even us. And, you know, when it came to us adjusting to, like, the current climate, you know, that we're dealing with right now, it was a challenge at the beginning, but we realized what worked for us was what worked for us at the beginning, you know, having that plan. You know, even though, you know, by the time, like, you know, 5 years after the fact we got started, by the time, you know, we were able to build organizations, you know, we have a core staff of 4 members now, including myself. And, you know, and kind of going back to the basics, it was me kind of falling back and, you know, not really putting on the hat of, you know, this is my organization, this is my idea, this is how things are going to go. You know, as a founder and the director, you know, sometimes we forget that it's an organization, it's a group of people that you're working with, not just yourself. And, you know, a lot of that, you know, a lot of us being able to pivot and, you know, adjust to the current climate required us to do that, you know, required us to kind of not just step out of our roles, but while doing our roles, you know, on our free time, step into another role that supports the organization. Either it's, you know, doing outreach, just simply doing administrative stuff, as well as like, drafting up policies that that reflect, the current climate that we're in right now. So it's like, for small organizations, it's definitely a challenge. And even just like, the challenge of, getting it structured. Some of the challenges that we were having at the beginning was not even so much doing the work or delivering the work that we wanted to do, but was just positioning ourselves to be able to say, okay, we could legally do the work, and with like, going back to what Debbie, Bill, and Kathy said, during this pandemic, even though we've been fortunate enough to still be able to continue doing the work we've been able to do, we've seen, many small grassroots organizations die out or have to put their idea or their dream on hold. And, like this pandemic definitely isn't just affecting us. It affects us in all kinds of ways, positive ways, negative ways. But also too, I think like, the one thing it did do a lot was really, it really highlighted, well, brought light to like, I guess the little steps that small organizations seem to, skip at times in order to like, manage their organization. When everything came crashing down, like everything that, we didn't do 2 years ago that we should have got done, a year ago that we should have got done, kind of like, came to like, bite us in the butt when this pandemic happened. So, like I said, going back to like where we are right now, a lot of the reason why like we were able to overcome it was the fact that we have those strong community partnerships. We have those strong organizational mentors. But also too, like we really focused on our participants, on the people that we're working for. We've in my case, like I had to work for free. We already get funding, but we weren't able to get enough funding. So like I said, it was just like some of the challenges of a small organization that really presented itself when the pandemic hit.
Thank you so much, Olushola. Olushola, you talked a bit, and I remind people to write your comments or questions for Olushola in the chat. You identified a number of challenges, including finances. So where are you looking for resources? How are you finding resources to address some of the challenges you've identified?
Well, the first place well, during the middle of the pandemic, like we were already in the middle of our funding, but when that happens, like, things change. With the work that we do, like we're very personable with our clients. Well, they need that in-person support. And now we're not able to see them. Jails are closed, group homes are closed down. So we had to take that pivot, put time and effort into like planning again, and then, re-executing the plan again. And, fortunate for us, like we have partners who believe in our work. We have partnerships where like their outcomes depend on the work that we deliver for them. So they were able to provide us some of the emergency funding that they receive, as well as us being able to finally get 2 grants ourselves to continue the funding. And mainly too, just because like with the work that we do, even though we had to make it COVID proof, there's no real alternative to supporting someone who's in need. Like we've seen it immediately. We've seen the effect of COVID happen to our participants immediately. Either it was through depression, anxiety, or not having the support, which eventually led to risky behavior that we're seeing in Toronto. So it was definitely a challenge, and like with the support of our community partners as well as like the direction of our board, we've been able to like navigate and sail through it, like navigate and make it through. Everyone has been working double time, when it comes to this, and it's almost like it feels like that's just simply what's required in order to like stay afloat, because we don't know how long this is going to be. We don't know if it's going to be a year or 2 from now that we go back to normal. So we have to make sure that whatever it is we're doing, we're able to adjust to the climate, and more importantly, adjust to our participants in the program.
Thanks for that, Olushola. There's a question for all 3 of you from Valley, who has had to drop off. He said, for community organizations, governance is about being fully accountable to stakeholders. So how do boards decide then which stakeholders are more important than others? You've all spoken about various stakeholders, various vested interests, sometimes they're competing interests. How do you decide who you respond to? You talk about issues of racial equity while talking about also serving hardest to reach communities. We are talking about truth and reconciliation work that we all need to do. We're talking about anti-Black racism. We're talking about other racisms that exist. We haven't even touched on issues of ableism, of queer folk being integrated. How do we manage all of that when we talk about a racial equity or a social justice agenda? Bill? Not to put you on the spot. You're muted.
Actually, Kathy started with an answer in the chat box too.
You go first, Bill.
Well, I think the traditional board and membership dichotomy that, you know, the membership elects the board, you know, it's still part of that old structure that doesn't work, that you don't get necessarily the voices that you need to be there. And that, you know, increasingly memberships were really neutered roles, right? I mean, you know, memberships are not meaningfully directing the board anymore at most organizations. You know, people don't sign up for memberships. People don't carry membership cards for nonprofit organizations. And so I do, that's why I'm so interested in the Reimagining Governance, in that, well, can we engage folks who are difficult to engage with by hiring them, by having them on, you know, getting their feedback and their input in a whole variety of ways. I mean, a big way at the neighborhood group is actually hiring participants to co-design and co-lead programs and services, and to have meaningful input as to what the service is going to look like. So all youth activities have teens who are in the design team and delivering them. All homeless programs have people with experience of homelessness, you know, doing that. All seniors programs have seniors who are co-leading the activities. And some of them might fit as the traditional definition of members and get membership cards and vote at the AGM, but that's really, you know, one night a year maybe, and not really much. So there has to be many more meaningful ways to have meaningful input from your participants and your neighbors. And membership probably isn't the best one.
Yeah,
yeah, Kathy, do you want to continue in some of your thinking?
Yeah, I totally agree with Bill that we've really, you know, put ourselves in a box about what our members are and who our board is and what the role of staff is. And often our communities and program participants get lost in the decision-making part of what the organization is doing. So really having, ultimately the vision would be that, you know, we, as organizations, we create that map of all of our stakeholders, funders, governments, staff, participants, neighbors, you know, the people 2 blocks down that are affected by the service that we're providing, and that we identify who they are and how they can be involved, and create pathways for them to be involved in the decisions that have to be made, rather than having just a single decision-making body. Because there's no way, like I think of ONN, we have a board of 8, so eight people are a board of directors. There's no way in 8 people we can have representation from every subsector, geography, demography, age, you know, position, race in those 8 people. So it can't be about those 8 people that make the fundamental decisions. It has to be about the 20-person policy committee and the decent work working group and the members that email us and the network at large. So I think it's more complex for sure. But the more people involved in our decision making, the more people involved in the design and implementation of our organizations, whatever our missions are, the stronger we are and the more resilient we are when there's a crisis.
Olusola, do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, absolutely. So like, you know, we're a much smaller organization, and you know, we're still like in the infant stages of our lifespan, I like to say. So,
yeah.
You know, the way we've been doing this, it's a lot different. Even though like we do have stakeholders and a board of directors, is not as large as, you know, the neighborhood group we're on. And so, you know, I think that's been working for us in our favor in respect to that. It's not too many, not to like going back to what Kathy said about like, you know, the more individuals you have at the decision table, the better. But like in respect like where we are right now and just like in, you know, building, focus on building like the programs, the foundation of it. You know, it helps that one, that we don't have many different either funders or board members at the table. We have the right amount, but also to that they understand, you know, where we're at. They understand that we're building. They understand that, like, you know, despite how important right now is, you know, we still need to be around years down the line. So
Yeah.
no, so it's you know, so like when it comes to like, you know, us being a, like I said, just kind of leaving that infant stage of the whole organization lifestyle, it was a decision that, like, you know, we kind of made together based off of, like, you know, what the policies and principles are of, you know, of the organization, you know. So like it hasn't been a challenge for us. Like I said, it's for us, it's been more of a help having that kind of governance at the table there. But it's like we find it like it definitely helps us in respect to, like, you know, where we lack and, you know, the challenges that are going to present themselves that we don't see ahead of time.
Yeah, there's a comment question from Kelly McKenzie to all three of you. That there are organizations that are surviving this year throughout this health pandemic that are more concerned about future years, right? That government has really stepped up in terms of things like the emergency wage subsidy, emergency income supports. Many funders are allowing organizations to maintain funding at the levels they negotiated, regardless of reduction in services, although we know that is not necessarily true for employment services and or health services here in Ontario. But organizations are concerned that they will not see a refinance of the fundraising increase anytime soon. There are organizations, we've been doing a research study, there are some organizations who've lost 60-70% of self-generated income. Bill talked about that as part of your early part of your presentation. So organizations are paying attention to what's going to happen between 2021, 22, 23. When the full financial impact will be felt. What should board members be preparing for? What should they be thinking right now in terms of keeping the organization whole as we move forward? What are some of the implications, and what are some of the responses to those implications? Kathy.
Sure, I'll start. I definitely agree, Kelly. I think 2021 and 2022 are going to be far worse than this year, which is scary because, you know, our last survey that we did of the sector, we had 1,200 nonprofits finish it in the summer, said 20% were going to be closed by Christmas. So, you know, we could lose 20% of our sector by this Christmas, and next year is going to be worse. So the huge concerns for the future of the nonprofit and charitable sector, for a couple of reasons. One, fundraising won't be able to continue in 2021 either in the same way. So events, galas, for sure. Those organizations that rely on social enterprise or fee for services, they won't be recouped in a year. It'll take them, some sport organizations are saying it'll take them 5 years to recoup to the level that they were at last year in terms of fees and sponsorships. And both the federal and provincial governments may enter an austerity agenda in the next year or two when they realize that the immediate crisis is over. And suddenly there are big deficits at the governmental level and at the municipal level as well. So I think it is going to get worse before it gets better. What keeps me going is that our sector is creative and resilient. There's been so many examples of collaborations, working with mutual aid networks and grassroots groups during the pandemic. Lots of examples right now of organizations that are supporting each other through this time, trying to hire each other's staff that were laid off and figuring out how to do things differently. And so I think that will help us get through. But for sure, what I think boards should focus on is not a 5-year plan. I think Bill's got the right example of, let's do some immediate action plans, some goals, annual goals, maybe quarterly goals. Our team is doing quarter by quarter, like a work plan and action plan 3 months at a time, because we can't picture what's going to be after the next 3 months. So thinking of some help the organization in the shorter term while keeping that, that long-term view, and building as many relationships as possible with governments, with funders and supporters. The role of the board right now is that should be all about relationship building.
Thanks for that. Olusola, in answering my question to you after your presentation, you talked a bit about addressing some of these challenges. Anything to add in terms of what are you saying to yourself and your board around the ongoing financial challenges in the next coming years?
You know what? I would say, and I say this just because I definitely want to take the opportunity to give credit to the work of the organization, the staff, and the board. And we don't really focus on the financial part. We focus on the clients. We focus on the clients and the participants. And we're an organization that's been around for years, and we've been able to accomplish the work with limited to zero funds. We've done this before in respect to operating without funds. And us being a grassroots organization, everyone at the team, not anymore, but anyone on the team at some point was doing direct life work as well as their full-time job. So in respect to how the financial climate is going to look for us in a couple of years. Even though it's something we do have to consider and factor in our decision making and our work to do today, we have the belief that if we simply focus and continue to support and service our participants the right way, the funding will come, and that's been the case for us this year so far. Hopefully, knock on wood. But when it comes to how the next couple of years will look, it's challenging. It's challenging, but at the same time, with the work that we do, we're an essential service. They need people who are, doing risky behaviors, criminal activities in the community. They need people to be supported, and we provide that support. And as long as we continue to provide that support at a high level, as long as we're persistent with it, maintain relationships, either this Toronto probation or whoever the case may be, we feel like the funds will come there. It's and even just with what I've seen this year with, colleagues of mine who have not-for-profits, founded not-for-profits, work for not-for-profits, as well as some whose not-for-profits died this year. A lot of what I've seen was, people who were focusing on the organization, weren't really able to survive, versus people who were focusing on their clients, either if it's, a person in need, or a person in jail, a person overcoming something, overcame this. So, we approach this hey, let's just focus on these guys. It's because if we're not working, if we're not operating, then we can't support these guys. So we need to focus on supporting these guys, because if we're supporting our clients, then whoever is funding us will support us to support our clients. So we actually just didn't say, hey, what are we going to do? Sit back, let's figure it out, let's wait for the government to come in, give us something. We took that opportunity to turn a notch upon, okay, let's try out new ideas. Let's see if this community partner will work with us on this, as well as just getting feedback, asking the clients, this is going on right now, are you okay? What's going on? Not just once in a while, but every week, because one week they're okay, the next week they're feeling depressed and ready to do something that is not going to be good for anybody. So like I said, for us, it's just focusing on the clients, focusing on the work that we do, focusing on the mission. We feel we'll still be around in the next coming years.
Thank you, Bill.
I like that organizational karma approach as well. That, you have to just keep doing the best, doing the good, and the good will find you back, right? So, I totally see that. Focus on the clients, but I know board members have also an obligation to focus on the organization. And so I'll say, I'm also very worried about austerity. If people are used to government funds, or a different kind of austerity in terms of fundraising and fees, that they will have less revenue in future years. And what I worry about is that the reserve funds will be gone, right? So people will spend down their reserves, and then every bump in the road is going to
Yeah.
be in a crisis. So whatever reserve funds that they spent down this year in order to manage, that's why we need a government stabilization plan and it should be allowed to put money into a reserve fund, because if people were living paycheck to paycheck before, the organization has to have some line of credit, some cushion in their reserve. But I will also say board members need to think outwardly. And the tendency would be to look inwardly and how do we save this organization next year and the year after. But you need to look outwardly, again, for networks and partners. At St. Stephen's, we got into the work of trusteeing grassroots organizations to try to keep them, give them the best support and capacity building we can do. So everyone should go out and adopt a grassroots organization in their neighborhood. They should just be, supporting them to survive, because they're even more precarious than you are, no matter how precarious you're feeling right now. And board members should be thinking about mergers. So I'm an organization of 3 organizations that merged together because we thought we would have a better future, and rather than have 20% close, maybe people need to partner up and come together, and that's another way to get through the storm. So trusteeships and mergers and thinking outwardly are some things I would suggest for board members. And if you just worry about a downward spiral, if you just focus internally, and each loss of revenue, each extra expense, each challenge just puts you deeper in the hole.
Yeah, that's good. And Axel is underscoring your message around the using reserves for this immediate emergency, and then what happens next, right? Every bump then throws you deeper and deeper into the hole. So yes, Axel uses language that it's irresponsible to exhaust your reserves. I think this is a good segue in terms of what then is the advocacy agenda. Bill, you referenced the stabilization fund. Kathy, maybe you can talk a bit some more about what it is that we've been pushing for at the provincial level in terms of a stabilization fund, as well as what our colleagues at Reimagine Canada and others at the national level have been pushing for federally, and where we are with any of that advocacy. I know that Okasi, in every meeting with provincial ministers, we continue to put the stabilization fund on the table. We often get ignored. They're not even commenting on our comments anymore. So a great update just to let people know. Before we speak though, Kathy, folks, you will see an invitation to the learning session in your chat. Please pay attention to it. It's scheduled for October 21st. So Kathy, what then is the advocacy agenda to push back against an austerity government agenda?
Absolutely, great question. So we've been working both with our federal counterparts and other provinces across Canada, and definitely there's about a 3-prong advocacy campaign. So one, that any programs that the federal government have for businesses be open to nonprofits. So that was the wage subsidy, for example, loans, startup funds, anything that they have offered to small business, that nonprofits and charities are eligible. And so we actually had to push our way into the wage subsidy initially. And of course, it has been a lifesaver for many organizations. So that advocacy is actually, that part of it has been going pretty well. The second piece is around new money. So stabilization funding. Federally, they're calling it resilience funding for organizations to help them get through this. The jury's still out whether we're going to be successful in that way or not. In Ontario, the budget's coming up in November. I know I'm doing a presentation for the Minister of Finance tomorrow, which we'll all be pushing for this. So this is the month to get a hold of your MPPs, to talk, any ministers they know it's on the radar. They know all about the need. What we're hearing from them is not any sense of that we're not, our sector's not important, but it's just they're so overwhelmed that every sector, travel and tourism and taxi cabs and airplanes, everybody needs support and is asking for support right now, and they can't figure out how to prioritize all of the industries that are looking for help. So, making sure that they know what the importance that this has for our sector is incredibly important. And also then the third piece is really advocating with donors and foundations to do more general operating funds, less project funding right now, money for IT systems, money for PPE, things that are really practical that we need, and to sort of open up their purse strings, especially for foundations, that this is the rainy day that they might have been saving for, and take away a lot of the constraints around how they're funded and open it up to what organizations need right now. And we're having some success with that, and we are seeing some foundations and donors be more generous and also change up what and how they're funding. But sort of those are the three big issues that we're focusing on. But I would say that if neither the federal or the provincial government has created any new funds for us by the end of November, that it's time to rethink that we're not going to get stabilization funding, and then we have to retool and focus on what we need to do for 2021.
That's great. Any other questions for our folks? In the chat, Axel is also pointing out that, yes, stabilization funds good for the sector in terms of the organizations, but our program participants or clients are also will need ongoing support. She put forward the idea of a basic income. It's certainly, there are lots of discussions happening around a basic income or guaranteed income. It's called different names. I was just about to say that I sit on a national working group through LEAF, which is the Women's Legal Education Fund, that's doing some research in terms of what some sort of guaranteed income will look like, especially one that has a feminist, a women-centered approach, of course, from an intersectional lens, so paying attention to Indigenous, Black, and other racialized women as well, women with disabilities, certainly significant. In terms of any sort of guaranteed income, we have to pay attention in terms of if we're bringing a guaranteed income that we don't lose some of the other safety income supports program like ODSP and those kinds of things that we should be looking to beef up as opposed to replace. So there are a number of questions around issues of guaranteed income and those kinds of things. Any other last comments before I do wrap up and housekeeping pieces? 30 seconds to our panelists. Olushola, I'm starting with you. What's the one takeaway you want our audience to leave with?
In a landscape like this, with what we're going on right now, prepare. Don't prepare for anything, prepare for everything. Prepare for the worst. Prepare for the best situation. But mainly prepare for how you can continue to move. Like I come from a football background, and I'm a very optimistic person when it comes to planning and thinking. So that would be like my piece of advice. With preparation, with the right people at the table, but more importantly, with grit and knowing that this will be over despite how much it sucks. You guys will still be able to survive and continue doing the great work that you're doing. So just stay prepared.
Thank you. Bill.
Muted, sorry. I need a t-shirt. You're on mute. I guess when I'm thinking about today and the challenges we face and just how stressful it is for our boards and governance, and that I think we need to really recognize that and acknowledge that. I mean, I think a lot of people have done a lot of acknowledgement of staff who are under stress, and lots of recognition of their staff and their mental health needs of the staff. And I think the board are on the same boat. So I think boards have very difficult discussions now, very difficult decisions to make, and are facing, as volunteers, much more than they might have signed up for. And I think some self-care and some support for boards are really important. And I must say, I haven't really had the opportunity to raise this with government. I'm sure the Volunteer Center and other people are saying this, but that I think that they you know, that some self-care for our board is actually a crucial thing that we're missing, because we have to have good and really tough conversations right now, and they are important in those discussions.
Thank you. Kathy, you have the last word.
So on a positive note, I think what I would leave with you is that we don't have to work in the governance systems that we currently have. We can recreate the governance system that we want, that fits our organization, and that gives us the power, and that shares the power and gives us the ways that we can work differently. And so we can really reimagine what that looks like. And the minimum legal requirements are nothing at all in comparison to what the opportunity is to do things differently going forward. And I think that gives me some hope that we can get through this crisis.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. This has been such, Diane, you're showing up on my screen very big, so it's good to see you. I love when I have board members on front and center. This has been such an important and interesting and informative conversation. I look forward to the learning sessions. Bill will be there as our resource person. I'm hoping that folks who contributed so much on the chat will also show up there to share some of the resources. Some of it have been posted. We'll make sure that it's put onto the website for the governance project. Our next panel will be on anti-racism, anti-Black racism specifically. As I said at the top of the meeting, it was scheduled for the 28th. We will have to change that date because it conflicts with our own OCASI's forum. A panel on the two pandemics. Kathy Taylor will also be on that panel on the two pandemics as part of the Executive Directors Forum that begins October 26th, runs October 26th through 29th. Thank you, panelists. There will be an evaluation we will be sending out to all 30 of you who joined us this afternoon. I believe, Bev, there were about 30 of us on this call. Any questions that you have, please don't hesitate to send it to myself, and I will make sure that it gets to where it needs to go, or to Sajide, who you can find at szarai@ocasi.org or ddouglas@ocasi.org. Thank you again to Bill, Olushola, and Kathy for a fabulous afternoon, and thank you, participants, for your active participation, your chat in the chat group, your questions, and your comments. See you all soon. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, Beverly, for organizing, and thank you, Sajide, for overseeing. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Cassie.
Thank you.